All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled Introduction to Virtual Engagement for SARTs, Part 1. This is a two-part webinar series. The second part is next week on the 20th. So if you have not already registered, please do so. I will drop the link in the chat. Okay, so we can do some introductions now. My name is Fatima Hayoma. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the rural project coordinators at the Sexual Violence Justice Institute at the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, also known as SVJI at MNCASA. I provide training, technical assistance, and just general support to individuals and teams who are doing multidisciplinary teamwork in rural areas. And as you can see, I am here today with Emily Singerhouse.
Hi, folks. Thanks so much for coming today. Yes, my name is Emily Singerhouse. I use pronouns she, her, hers. I am a consultant for MNCASA and SCJI, but I'm also a researcher and evaluator on the topics of violence prevention, and public health. So I'm based over here in Tampa, Florida, which is also the traditional territory of the Tocosaga, and I am excited to be chatting with you all today on virtual engagement. And in the meantime, I would love if all of you would put your name, pronouns, role, where you're from in the chat. Looks like we've already had quite a few folks get started, and I see we have representation from all over the country. And I see quite a few folks from Florida as well. So while you're doing that, I'm going to go through some quick housekeeping. Normally we would say, hey, throw your camera on, so we can have this as more of like a dialogue. But since we're in a webinar format, we're just going to be using the chat function today for interactions. And so feel free to leverage this chat. So you can add in any reactions you might have, any thoughts or experiences that you want to share on the topics that we're going to be chatting about today. This is a great space to network with other grantees, learn from one another, and then see what partnerships might cultivate in this space here today. Additionally, feel free to put in the chat any questions that you might have. Fatima will try to respond during the presentation. Otherwise, we'll stop at the end of each section and see if there's any questions that come up during that time. Next, this will be recorded for you all to reference this after the presentation to share it with folks who couldn't join us today. So this will be all available to you as a resource. And then Fatima, I'm not sure if we're doing subtitles with this format or not, but typically we are able to turn that on, and then if you'd like, you can turn them off. However, if you would like, oh, here we go, there they are. Subtitles are accessible for you if you would like to use them. All right, last but not least, we will be having a questionnaire be sent out at the end of this presentation to ask for some feedback on how we did or any points of improvement that you'd like to see, or to ask any questions that you might have. So feel free to respond to that after our presentation today. So thanks again, folks, for putting your name and role and where you're at in the chat. We've got quite the diverse group of folks with us today, from all over the nation, with many different roles. So this is very, very exciting. And I'm going to pass this next part over to Fatima.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. So before we get started, I want to share that this project is supported by the Office on Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this training are those of the trainers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Justice, Office on Violence Against Women. So before we really get started, I'm going to talk a bit about SVJI at MNCASA. MNCASA is a statewide coalition driving transformative culture change to address sexual violence, through advocacy, prevention, racial justice, and systems change. The Sexual Violence Justice Institute, also known as SVJI, is a national program operating within MINCASA. SVJI works to create long-term, sustainable systems responses to sexual violence that meet the specific needs of each community. So we at SVJI operate under 5 values. That is collaboration, integrity, courageous and bold action, prevent harm, and social justice. And just to give you a quick summary, if you're new to SVJI, what do? We provide training. So we do webinars like this one today. We do workshops, conferences, and we also provide training on special topics. We also create and share resources. So on our website, you'll find templates, fact sheets, blogs on sexual assault response teams. You'll also find toolkits and guidebooks. And my favorite part of the job is that we provide support. So we do a lot of brainstorming, meeting facilitation, and problem solving. And finally, we're here as a point of connection. So we're here to connect you with other experts, to other TA providers, whether it be statewide or national, to your peers and mentors. And with that, we'll get started with a presentation, which I'll hand off to Emily.
Awesome, thank you. So this is a quick overview of what we're going to be chatting about today. So we're going to be starting off with an overview of what virtual engagement is and what that looks like for SARTs. Next, in the second section, we're going to be talking about how to use virtual engagement within your work. I'm going to be giving you some examples of different methods, platforms, and ways that you can use it. And then we're going to start off in the third section with a little bit more of an interactive activity to start building or thinking about different ways that virtual engagement can come up in your work. So without further ado, we're going to start off with a poll. Let's get a pulse on how familiar you are with virtual engagement. So there it is, awesome. So we've got some options here. You could be feeling like you don't really know where to start. You know some. You might be feeling kind of neutral, a little bit of both. You might know a little bit, but could always learn. And then you might be feeling that you are an expert. You know exactly what to be doing for virtual engagement. So we're going to take a moment for folks to fill this out, and then I will present the results to you all. All right, so I am going to close the poll in just a couple of seconds. So if you haven't responded, feel free to dive in. Here are the results. So it looks like we have quite a few people who know what to do, but are really here to learn more. Some folks don't even know where to start, so that's great. This is going to be a little bit of between those two pieces. We're going to be sharing some basics, but we're also going to be sharing some more granular details about virtual engagement. So thanks so much, everybody, for sharing where you're at. It's nice to kind of see where your knowledge is currently at before this presentation. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing these results. Fantastic. So what is virtual engagement then? What would that definition be? It's kind of one of those abstract terms that you may have heard before, but it's relatively new. And the way we define it is interactions between people or organizations to build relationships and conduct activities. So what does this have to do with SARTs? Why would this be something that you would be interested in? So to start off, there's been a lot of recent work in the field about how to improve the response to sexual assault by coordinating the efforts of SART teams, especially in this new COVID-19 world, how to equip SARTs to thrive in this new world. So a lot of work has been trying to figure out how to cultivate that type of space. And some of the findings have suggested that team stakeholder groups, evaluation methods, formal and collaborative structures are the most effective at improving victim experience with the criminal justice system. So these three elements kind of make up what an effective SART looks like. So how can virtual engagement help make SARTs more effective when assisting teams in increasing stakeholder groups, evaluation, and structure? So some people would like to put in the chat what they think, how exactly virtual engagement can help support SARTs when increasing stakeholder groups, evaluation, and structure, or just to help them be more effective. So we're going to take a moment to let folks type in just a guess or what they think is the answer to this question. All right, so we have a great response in here, improved attendance, especially since SARTs cover a large round geographically. Someone said for our agency, having the virtual option allows for more participation. It's a great example. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of folks like to use it, especially to kind of close that geographical gap. Helping survivors feel safe, that's a great example. Increased participation attendance, more productive, exactly, yes. So you are all on the right track here. So you can expect that virtual engagement helps SART teams be more effective through collaboration, which you've mentioned. It can also help increase resource sharing. So having resources dispersed across the community and working together with other agencies to share in those resources. Increase education within community members and systems. Increase leadership sharing on the efforts of either responding to sexual assault and even preventing it in the first place. Communication is a big one here. So really it helps allow and increase more impactful, consistent, and collaborative communication. And finally, a huge one here as well, virtual engagement can help SARTs be more effective by providing an environment and climate for support. So thinking about the people that you interact with, why would virtual engagement kind of work with each one? So I'm going to give examples of different groups that SARTs might engage with and how it might be helpful for each one. So for system providers, research has shown that SARTs with more shared leadership actually outside of one organization have a better delivery of services. So for shared leadership and virtual engagement, this looks like the ability to increase dialogue, delegate tasks, and the overall ability to have ownership over the approach to response instead of having siloed efforts within each sector of the community. Next, SARTs with shared community resources also have a positive effect on prosecution case outcomes. So that's huge. Being able to have community resources shared across different agencies is actually very impactful for case outcomes. And virtual engagement directly connects with that because it helps boost that connection between people that are technically geographically dispersed, especially in rural communities. It also helps create a space with others to coordinate those resources, communicate when needs for outsourcing of resources needs to take place. So when you need to go to another agency to help outsource some of the needs that you have, and then shared ownership of the response again. So this is quite an overview of what system partners can utilize with virtual engagement with SART. Next, community members are a huge piece of SART work. So that can look like education, awareness, outreach, and so much more. And so SARTs with community relationships actually have higher prosecution rates. And that has a lot to do with knowing who you are and what exactly a SART does. So virtual engagement is really helpful in helping cultivate that ability to share what the SART is, who you are, putting a face to the name, and what exactly you're doing for sexual assault response in the community. It also helps educate folks in the community and highlight the support and services that you offer. So this is kind of creating an easy and accessible space for people to come together in ways that they wouldn't normally be able to, no matter their geographic location or even their capacity to attend events or meetings. Some literature has even showed, and work in the past has shown, that people prefer in-person and hybrid type of meetings, hybrid or virtual meetings over in-person, and sometimes they have a 90% higher attendance rate. So SARTs with community input also have increased community trust. So virtual engagement helps cultivate some community input, because communities that know that they have a SART and recognize them can really help build community trust. Community engagement can help give space for community members to give feedback on protocols, practices, and identifying needs for education, awareness, and other types of services. And also a large protective factor against multiple forms of violence, including sexual violence, is having the ability to contribute to decision-making in your community. So utilizing virtual engagement to help kind of push that along is really important for a variety of reasons with community members. And finally, team members, those folks that make up that SART team with you. So to start off, SARTs with strong relationships and teamwork create better service delivery. So this can cultivate between email communications and being able to communicate with one another, have that resource sharing ability, delegating, leadership sharing, and support with one another. Next starts with coordination of activities and materials, increased motivation, and long-term momentum. So this is a really big one, is to keep people coming back and decreasing turnover within your team. So virtual engagement can help bring people together to coordinate those activities, have those meetings, share those documents that are all needed to have the day-to-day activities of a SART take place. So that is just a quick overview of the people that you may interact with and why virtual engagement can be useful for them. So there's this last part here. For SART, virtual engagement is one of many tools that can be added to your toolbox. So this could be used to engage with your team, system partners, and community members to accomplish your goals. Virtual engagement isn't an end-all to be-all. It's not the one and only tool that should be used. It is one tool of many that can be added to your very vast and diverse toolbox. Fatima, I love the way that you also described this. Is there anything that you wanted to add to this slide here?
No, I think that's perfect. Exactly what Emily said. You have many tools already as SART coordinators or folks that are part of a SART team. This is simply just a strategy that your team could take on to engage with not only your team, but also your larger community.
Excellent, thank you. So for our next section here, I'm just going to take a really quick pause and refer to the chat quickly to see if there's been any questions or comments. And it looks like we've had some. Deborah says more participation creates ownership. That's very true, exactly. And it's about meeting people where they're at right now. And typically that is virtually, especially in this COVID-19 world, when a lot of things are already happening virtually, or you're very geographically spread out. All right, so feel free to add any questions to the chat if you want me to clarify anything, or if I'm going too fast, feel free to let me know. So
Emily, we
we're
actually
gonna
have
dive
a
in.
question. Sorry about that, Emily.
Oh yeah,
We actually have a question in the Q&A function. I'm not sure if you have access to that, but I can read it out loud.
thank you.
Having been a
Go ahead.
community rep on the original SART or SMART team here in my community, we have used a lot of community partners. It seems like then it swung into core partners of advocacy, law enforcement, medical courts. I see the swing going back to broader community representation. Is this intentional and recent? Personally, I think it worked better that way, so it makes me happy.
That's a great question. What do you think, Fatima?
Yeah, so I can get started. I think I totally agree with you, Roberta. I think the swing back makes me happy too. I would say historically it feels intentional that we are trying to reach a broader audience, and that might have to do with the fact that we are also engaging virtually. So we're able to capture a wider net of people. Emily, thoughts?
Yeah, I would have to agree with that as well. I think with the teams that I've worked with in the past that are currently trying to do virtual engagement activities, they're engaging a lot more with the community at large as opposed to specific sectors within the system and their partners. And I think, as Fatima said, really the virtual aspect of it can kind of open the doors to invite some people in who wouldn't normally be at the table. And that's one of the strengths of this virtual aspect, but it can also be a weakness on its own as well, but which we will try to get into at some point. But I hope, Roberta, did that answer your question? Yeah, okay. All right, awesome. Well, I am going to continue on then if there's no more questions. So for this next section, we are going to be talking about virtual engagement in your work. So we're going to open up a poll again. Is your SART currently engaging virtually? And some of the options are going to be yes, no, want to learn a little bit more. Take a few moments for folks to fill this out. All right, we're just going to wait a few more seconds and then we're going to go ahead and end the poll. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share the results, and it looks like almost 70% of you are engaging virtually already, so that's excellent. I see in the chat here that we've got folks doing hybrid with a Zoom option as well, which is awesome. And so thanks for filling that out. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing these results. All right, so before I dive deeper into these methods, I just want to really quick cover a topic called technology readiness. This is also sometimes referred to as generation gap, but I like to call it technology readiness. And that's just the different levels of ability and comfort using or adopting technology within efforts. This can look different for everyone of any age group, of any population. It really is just a level of comfort using technology. And so when thinking about that, it's really important to remember that there is room for all of us to connect in our own ways. There is no right way or wrong way, and there's many different comfortability levels and options for folks to participate in. So some pieces of tidbits that we'd like to offer you to think about is to build off of what is already in place when engaging virtually. You can utilize the media sources that are already there, the technology and training that's already there before starting everything from scratch. And then leaning into others is a huge strength when trying to figure out how to start any new initiative or project or navigate a new or already existing initiative that's been happening. So lean into others that you work with, that you work for. So then there's also providing a variety of options to have folks engage virtually, whether that's letting them run the whole show or just letting them, attend the meetings, attend the webinars, and maybe offer some advice. It really is up to their level of comfortability, and it's important to make sure you provide a variety of options to ensure they can engage when they want to. And lastly, remembering your values as SARTs is really key to including folks at the levels that they want to be included in. So with that in mind, we've got a variety of different methods that virtual engagement can take place in. So we've got social networking, teleconferencing, telecommunication, direct communication marketing. These are 4 different, I would say, categories of virtual engagement. So I'll be describing each of these methods, and I'll be giving you some ideas for what you can do with them, and then what platforms are the most impactful for SARTs to utilize within these methods. So to start off is social networking. This is one of the more common ones, and commonly known ones, I should say, which is just using the platforms that people use to build relationships with like-minded individuals or organizations. And so this can be used typically in your team with system partners and community members. Social networking can look like sharing events on Facebook, building partnerships with other service providers via Instagram, spreading education on issues and awareness of the team and to youth and adult community members. So social networking uses platforms like Facebook, as I said, Instagram, which is great for connecting with others, especially youth leaders and other organizations in education. And I'm just going to really quick go back. I forgot to mention, Facebook is really great for events, announcements, posting pictures and videos for educational and or awareness issues. Instagram, as I said, great for connecting with others, especially youth or youth leaders, other organizations, and to spread education. And also YouTube, this would be a really impactful platform for SARTs to use to create videos on education, on things like processes, what happens when you interact with SARTs, what are the step-by-step processes and practice that take place, what are your protocols. You can do a 101 video on education of sexual violence or DVSA. You can share your trainings that you are hosting in other webinars on YouTube. And for these platforms as well, the SCJI Real Realities blog does go pretty in-depth on each of these platforms. For example, what the audience looks like and specific best practices or recommended practices related to these. Check that out. Next, we have teleconferencing. So this is a category that most people use almost on a day-to-day basis. So this is just creating the opportunity for individuals to meet without needing to be in person. Who can guess what that is? So this is typically used for virtual engagement with your team, but it can also very well be used with community members and system partners. So this can look like hosting events, trainings, webinars, and community town hall events, office hours, and so much more on platforms such as Zoom, Teams, and Skype, which are all really great platforms to host meetings, webinars like we are today, where we have folks from all over the country sitting with us, which normally wouldn't be able to happen. These platforms can also be utilized for virtual and hybrid events. Hybrid is when some folks are in person, some folks are online. So that is a great resource to leverage within your toolbox. This also goes more in depth on the SBJI Real Realities blog to describe a little bit more on what you can do with these platforms. Next, we have direct communication marketing, which is a form of communication through emails, texting, and more. So this can look like sending an email update to your team after your meeting to give an update and overview of what took place, send out your agenda items and next steps, create a monthly newsletter to send to system partners to update them on your activities, or create messaging campaigns for events. So this is typically used for system partners and community members. However, it can be a very successful category to utilize within your team as well. So most people use Gmail or a form of like Office 365, classic email platform, great for communication. We also have Basecamp. Some folks might be familiar with this. Basecamp is a really, really awesome tool. It's a communication and also like kind of a project management tool where you can share documents, materials, update timelines, and collaborate with team members from all over the country or even in your own neighborhood, of course, as well. But it's really kind of like a team-centered platform, which I would highly recommend looking into. Next, there's MailChimp, which is a great newsletter and automation software. This also has the ability to make websites or smaller automated messages to folks with forms that they can fill out. This is a great way to spread messages and let people know what you have going on. Next, we have telecommunication. So this is also sometimes known as broadcasting. This is using virtual methods to spread information and messages to others. So it's typically used for culture change messaging, awareness campaigns, and public service announcements, so PSAs. So say you want to decrease community beliefs on traditional gender norms or increase awareness on sexual violence, announce new policies or information. Telecommunication is a great way to do that. So this is typically used, most commonly at least, for community members. I wouldn't say I've been very familiar with folks who use this for teams, but it possibly could be used for systems as well. But like most people know, television, podcasts, and radio are the main platforms that telecommunication can take place on. So say you have an event coming up that you want folks to join or attend or to sign up for, hop on the radio on your local radio station and say, announce what you have going on, or if it's like Sexual Violence Awareness Month, you can educate folks on the local podcast or create a PSA for the television. Whatever it may be, this is a great way to do it. So I just gave a quick overview of all the different platforms and methods and gave some tidbits of different ideas that you could utilize with it. So let's put in the chat what methods you're thinking about bringing back to your team. Is there anything that you heard that you're kind of excited to check out or anything like that? All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep going on. Oh, it looks like we've got some folks coming in. So some folks said that they had not heard of MailChimp before. That's a great site to check out. If you want to start, I believe it's for free, or they have a free version where you can just create a quick email blast to send out to folks to update on your activities or events that you have coming up. Some folks are saying letting them know that this can continue and isn't an artifact of COVID that is going away. That's a really great piece there, Roberta, of just letting them know that this is something that can supplement the work that you're already doing, depending on where your community is already at with their COVID protocols. So like, say some of the people in your community might not be totally comfortable coming to in-person events. You can still have that hybrid option to help be more accessible to others who might not be in the same position as others. Della says that we would like to have a way to share documents and resources between meetings and with other SART members. That is a huge need that a lot of folks have as well. So leveraging resources like Dropbox, I'm not sure, not everybody can use Dropbox, especially if you're a state agency, or like SharePoint. Google is a really fantastic alternative. Google Drive has the option to have shared resources. Alternatively, there is the opportunity to utilize your email to send out those resources and materials after meetings. And like I said, Basecamp is a great alternative as well. You can upload documents directly onto Basecamp to be shared with everybody on the team. Right, awesome. So we still have quite a few minutes left, so we're going to spend a little bit of extra time on our next section here. But we're going to still listen in the chat. Fatima, have any questions came in on the Q&A piece?
Not that I know of. Looks like we've answered every question that's gone through.
All right, fantastic. Look at us on top of things, eh? All right, so I'm going to move into our next section here of starting out how to engage virtually. So this is going to be an activity-based section of the presentation. So get out your notebooks, your Microsoft Word, your Google Docs, pen and paper, Post-it notes, your phone for some note-taking on there. We're going to be writing out some goals and values to establish your purposes for engaging online. So this is the first and most foundational step of starting to integrate virtual engagement into your work. What we're going to be doing is outlining the three goals. It doesn't have to be three. It can be any amount of goals, 1, 2, 5, whatever it may be. And then we're going to start thinking about the values that are attached to it and what outcomes you hope to have from the virtual engagement. So for example, a goal that could be based in your work plan, your implementation plan, or any other document or protocol that you have, your mission statement, whatever it may be. It could be to increase youth presence in meetings, enhance communities' understandings of SART. You could have a goal of increasing engagement in team meetings, whatever it may be. We're going to write down 1 to 3 goals, at least one goal. And then we're going to talk about the values attached to it. So for example, if you have the goal of increasing engagement in team meetings, accessibility might be one of those values that you have to ground you in that goal. Say you have the goal of increasing youth presence on your team. trauma-informed care might be a value that you have within that goal. That enhance communities' understandings of SARTs, you probably have a community-centered value. So we're just going to be outlining those 3 goals, the 3 values attached to it. Sorry, hold on one moment. My dog is going. All right, excellent. Sorry about that. I know dog barks can be very alarming on a Zoom call. So there's our last piece here, outcomes. So this is what you hope to come from your virtual engagement. So any of the activities or efforts that you conduct, we need to outline the outcomes you hope to see from it. So for the first goal, we have increasing engagement in meetings. This could look like stronger relationships in your team. That's going to be the overall outcome that you get from this, which helps create more effective SARTs. Next, we have the goal of increasing youth presence in meetings. That outcome would be a youth leader or volunteer seat on your team or volunteer on your coalition, and you work together to get input, whatever that outcome may be. Next, you might have the goal of enhancing community understandings of SARTs. The outcome for that one would be something like community members know the purpose of a SART or recognize your team at local meetings and events. So feel free to add in the chat if you have any questions on what we're going to be doing. I'll give another example as well. So I've recently worked with an MDT that wants to increase survivor leadership in their team, increase youth presence, and educate the community. They have the values of trauma-informed care, cultural responsiveness, and community-centered values as well. And so their outcomes are to have at least one survivor compensated on their team. Another one is to increase youth presence by establishing an advisory board of youth-focused protocols. Another outcome that they have from educating the community as the goal, the outcome is to have at least one community event on sexual violence awareness. So typically, these again are going to be based in the plans that you already have, the goals and values that are currently taking place, but this is going to help supplement those activities. Are we feeling thumbs up, thumbs middle, thumbs down to get started? Is there anything that am I missing to kickstart this?
No, I think we're good. Looks like we have some thumbs up in the chat. How many minutes would you like for folks to think about this?
If we could spend at least like 15 minutes working through this, 15 to 20 minutes working through this together, and then we'll have 10 minutes to debrief, and then have room for more questions. We can definitely do that.
Perfectly. And we also have the Q&A function. So even though this is an introduction, if you have questions about anything from this presentation or questions that we haven't touched on today, please feel free and utilize the Q&A function, and we'll leave some time towards the end to do a bit of Q&A with Emily.
Awesome. So I am going to have Fatima walk through this next slide as well to help prompt some ideation. So again, I'm going to move on to this next slide. So this visual is going to go away. But we're having 3 goals, 3 values, and 3 outcomes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the next slide.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. So as you're thinking about your goals, Emily and I came up with some of these questions to ask yourself. So when thinking about continuing to engage in virtual engagement or taking on strategies that we talked about today, one of the first questions to think about is, who is your audience? So when you're trying to engage in virtual engagement work, who are you trying to reach? Is it each other? Are you trying to connect with members within your SART? Is it your community? By community, I mean your community of organizations or disciplines who then participate in your SART. Or is it your larger community? So that could be folks who aren't familiar with your SART work at all. They might not know that their community has protocol. Or is it more of a culturally specific audience? Are you trying to reach a certain group of people or a culturally specific community? So that's the first thing to think about. Who is your audience? The next question is, what is your message? What are you trying to convey by engaging in this type of work? Is it conveying news about your SART? Letting your community know what is happening within your team, what conversations are occurring, whether it's news about your protocol or updates about your agencies and disciplines. That could also be awareness messaging. So you might be talking about what sexual violence looks like in your community, what sexual violence looks like nationally, and how does it relate to what is going on in your area. You could be wanting to share resources or just generally share what collaboration between disciplines and organizations looks like in your community. So these are just some examples. The next thing to think about is, what do you want to accomplish? So what are you hoping to get across from this message? Is it to increase education about sexual violence? Is it to share resources about sexual violence or share who in your community is providing services to survivors? Or are you simply wanting to just gain community input? A next good question to ask yourself as you're trying to think of your goals is, where do you want to engage your audience? And what is the best method to communicate your message? So Emily just went over this, but which methods are you wanting to take on to do this work? Which platforms do you want to use? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Or are you simply just wanting to have conversations virtually? The next question is, when and how often should you communicate? So this is something that can obviously be decided later and something that can always change. But something to think about as you're planning this now is, how often do you want to do this? Do you want to communicate as often as your SART meets? Do you want to communicate monthly, quarterly? That is all dependent on your SART and the capacity of you yourself as a site coordinator or as a team member, and as generally a team. And finally, as you're thinking about engaging in this goal, it's really important to ask yourself, why is this message important to your audience? So in order to answer this question, you kind of have to answer the first couple questions. Who are you trying to reach? What do you want to share with this audience? But it's really important to, as you're answering these questions, finish with this last one, and it's, why is this important to share? Emily, anything here that you would like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. So these reflection questions help ground your goals, values, and outcomes. So these can help you reflect on your plans and what you hope to accomplish. So I'm going to go back to the last slide. You can see how this can be set up, and then I'm going to put some examples in the chat. We're going to spend the next 10, 15 minutes or so with folks thinking, and then we're going to have a little bit of a share out, okay? So I'm going to mute and then start putting some examples in the chat. I'm going to read some questions that came in during this. So first question is, sometimes other programs are not as diligent on responding to the invite sent for the virtual meeting. How do you approach that situation respectfully and professionally with complete understanding that that person's schedule is just as packed as your own? So typically, we recommend sending at least 2 to 3 reminders after the initial invitation to prompt a response from folks and remind them that, hey, I know this totally may have slipped through the cracks on your very busy email and your very busy schedule. So here's just a quick little push to remind you that we have this event or meeting going on. This is also a great way to make sure that they don't feel singled out, because then you can send these reminders to everybody. So everybody gets the same information. Then there's also the potential option to speak to the program directly to see how maybe you could address any needs or concerns that might be preventing them from responding to the invitations or participating virtually. Maybe they don't have all the software materials that is needed for this program, or maybe they just don't feel very comfortable engaging online. So it might be worth having a conversation with folks to meet them where they're at a little bit more. But I feel like in the past, I've seen just a little bit more of a reminder is typically very helpful while still being professional. Fatima, is there anything that you'd like to build off of that?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, this is something I always recommend, but if you're consistently having trouble with turnout for your team members, something that might be worth doing is conducting a survey monkey, for example, with your members of the team. Ask them if this method of engagement is working. If you have a team that does not really want to engage virtually, then that might be something you have to discuss as a large group. And that's because, as many of your SARTs already function, probably have an MOU or type of written agreement saying that you are a member of this SART, which does involve engagement and participation. So that's something to think about as a strategy if you're having trouble getting folks to the table. If they aren't responding to your reach out for a invite to the meetings, then a digital survey might not be the best option. So it would also be worth meeting with folks one-on-one, in person, or over the phone if they prefer, to see one, why they aren't attending, and two, if they are unable to really attend, if they can send a different representative from their agency or discipline to attend on their behalf.
Excellent, thank you. So we had another question come in as well that asks, what are some ways to increase engagement and interactions during the virtual meetings? We have many partners show up to the meetings, but most do not actively participate. So this is a great question. We've gotten this quite a lot. And luckily we have a little micro learning coming out on this in the next couple of weeks or so. But to kind of kickstart this, we would recommend sending some ground rules at least for participation and what participation looks like for this group and for these meetings. So for example, I've seen a lot of teams make rules that people have to have their cameras on to participate in the meetings, or have them on as much as they possibly can, because it's so easy to just turn them off and then check your email, check your phone, but you're there, you're present, your name is there, but typically then it's just like blank screens. And then you're not going to get any participation, and everybody's going to jump on that bandwagon as well and not have their camera on too. So that is one that I would recommend pressing as much as you can, or as much as you feel comfortable with. However, I know it's not always possible, since most of us are working from our home or in our offices that are also shared spaces. It's okay to, maybe when they're speaking, have their camera on or something like that. Work with them when you can to find a good common ground for that. Another recommendation I've seen is having a rotating order for speaking on a topic. So when you have virtual meetings, there's always that kind of awkward, like, ooh, should I talk now? But what if I interrupt you? Then there's that like weird unmute. So it can get kind of, it's hard to navigate sometimes. So having an order in which people speak is really helpful, so people know when they can expect to participate, and also to avoid any Zoom uncomfortableness. So for example, like, you have your agenda items. With each agenda item, folks can go in order and give their updates or share their thoughts, or not if they want to. Another example I've seen is rotating roles within meetings. So folks are consistently engaged in different capacities. So one person's taking notes one week, the next week or the next quarter meeting, it's a different person. So rotating note taking, agenda creation, who's sending out the notes afterwards. There's got to be somebody that says, hey, like, we got to move on to the next topic. So having that type of person have a role as well, or meeting host, whatever it may be, kind of rotating those roles really helps boost engagement and activity within meetings, because each person then has their own responsibility to contribute to the meeting as opposed to just showing up. Team building exercises are a really great way to boost engagement during virtual meetings, to kind of build that foundation. I know team building exercises can be kind of hard to navigate with virtual meetings, but there's a lot of really great examples online of virtual, like, icebreakers that I would recommend doing at the start of every meeting, is having an icebreaker. So folks kind of have that one moment to laugh or connect or be vulnerable before the meeting starts, to help build trust and get to know each other a little bit more. And then having a hybrid option is also pretty helpful. So folks can be in person if that's how they feel most comfortable and how they're going to be most useful to the team. If they want to be in person, great. If they want to be online, say they have a ton of meetings that day, or they live really far away, or they just would rather be online, awesome too. Meeting people where they are is really key for this piece. Fatima, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
I don't think so for that section, or that question specifically, but I really liked your example of having rotating roles for note taking or even facilitating. I think shared leadership is one of the best ways to keep your team engaged virtually or in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that can get kind of hard to navigate when you have really large teams, depending on what your SART or team looks like. I've seen with like 30, 40 people, that can get kind of hard to have engagement. So typically with those, we have folks who are kind of like the spokesperson of that organization, or work group that they might be a part of within the SART. So depending on what yours looks like, there's different ways to navigate ensuring that there is engagement from at least each sector that needs to be a part of the team. All right, awesome. So would anybody like to share some goals that they have for their team, and maybe some values that are attached to that and the outcomes that they hope to see from it? I gave some examples in the chat. The most recent was one goal that I've seen at MDT have was enhancing community understanding. Their value was community-centered, and they wanted to host at least one hybrid community town hall to gather input on their processes and protocols. So that's one way to engage virtually. And again, this activity is something that that is to build the foundation before you start doing your virtual engagement. This is important to have everything at least written out or thought of before engaging virtually, so you come in with a strategic and an impactful and intentional approach to make sure that you're not seeing any lulls or unanticipated challenges because you didn't know about, the right method to reach people online or something like that. It's really important to have this planning piece to start your virtual engagement strategy, which will help supplement your other activities. So if folks would like to share in the chat or in the Q&A anything that they have thought about or written down, that would be awesome. And if you need a little bit more time to think about it, no worries. You're also welcome to put any questions that you might have in the chat as well. I know this can be very hard to navigate virtual engagement. I'm sure you've all seen different barriers within your work or points of need to start doing some sort of virtual work. So if you have just like questions, we're also super happy to answer those as well. But I just want to make sure we have space for folks to share any goals or values or any barriers that they experience with this activity. Are you struggling trying to outline which goals, which values you're doing, and how those outcomes might be pertinent to virtual engagement? For the next presentation, hoping we can get the option to have people unmute. So I'm sorry that I know the chat can be kind of hard to type in. So sorry about that. We'll try to fix that for next time. I'm going to also go to the next slide as well, just in case folks want to maybe respond to any of these prompts or reflections that you might have. It looks like we've got one person in the chat saying, I'd really like to see more attendance and work on organizational structure and a SART community event. Ooh, that's awesome. I love that you want to also work on organizational structure. That's really important to kind of get down, especially if you're trying to increase attendance and do an event that's kind of more that foundational piece to help you grow long term. So that's a really awesome way to start thinking about things. An organizational structure is a great place to start as well with virtual engagement, because then you can engage with other people online and set up the environment to, such as like your Google Drive, your shared folders, your document sharing platforms, your communication platforms, and your roles and responsibilities, where all of that is located. You can do that online and even have that like paper copy as well. So when you focus on organizational structure, this is a really great place to think about that. Okay, awesome. Okay, so we've got some comments in here as well. So Teresa says that they've utilized Zoom as a means for enhancing attendance. However, you've struggled to have partners attend. You've tried several different options, such as inviting speakers, which is a great option, trying to set goals for the team, etc. Our attendance continues to suffer, and we would appreciate more suggestions to help our SART grow to the numbers it had when it originally started many, many years ago. So that's definitely a barrier that we've seen other communities have as well. Their turnout is just not the same as it used to be when the SART first was in its inception. Fatima, do you want to try to answer this first? Do you want me to go ahead?
Go for it.
Okay, great. So kind of thinking back to the Q&A question on different activities that folks can do during meetings to help boost engagement, definitely would start with having their cameras on. I am going to assume that most people have them off. That's very, very typical for a lot of communities that I've seen. However, that's not the same for everybody. So maybe having more roles for them and responsibilities for them to participate in the meeting and contribute would be a great place to start as well. So realigning what their purpose is and why they're in the meeting might be a great place to start. Fatima, looks like you have something you want to say.
Oh, sorry, I didn't even realize I didn't mute myself there. No, I was going to say the same exact thing. I think this question is lined up with a lot of the other questions we've already answered. But similarly, just making sure there are roles for your members, or making sure that they are aware of their role as a member within your SART.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of dives into our next question here, or comment, is that somebody had a goal of streamlining and consistent processes for sexual assault response. Thinking about these processes and protocols that you have might be a great way to get people involved again. If you relook at some of those protocols that were created many, many years ago, think, are they still relevant? And if so, great. If not, how can we all come together to update them, to enhance them, to maybe add new ones or take some away that aren't working for the way your community looks like now? So there's sometimes lulls in activities that SARTs can do if there's a really long-standing protocol and practice already established. It's a very mature SART. Sometimes people don't really know how to move forward and up with that. So kind of relooking at some of those processes and realigning the goals of the SART to the way the community is today. And a great way to also do that as well is to get some community feedback on the SART, or system feedback on the SART as well. Maybe trying to set up an initiative to get, or a survey to get people involved in improving your SART is a great way to get people to start showing up again. All right. Well, we're going to hang around for a few more minutes, but we can definitely close out this webinar as well if folks would like. Fatima and I will be here to answer questions, reflect on these prompts with you as you start thinking about engaging virtually or enhancing the engagement that you're already doing. So I am also going to flip to our next slide here as well. Here are our emails that you can reach out to us if you have any questions at all. I'm happy to help answer questions on virtual engagement or things in that nature, research evaluation, love that. Fatima is also a great resource for you for technical assistance and so much more. Fatima, feel free to share what they can reach out to you for, but yeah.
Yeah, so yes, thank you for attending our very first webinar ever on virtual engagement here nationally. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there is a part 2 to this presentation, and that's where we'll be really diving into how to do this work. This was really just an introduction to virtual engagement and to prepare you for that conversation. In the chat, I've dropped our questionnaire, so we would really appreciate any feedback. As you mentioned, this is as I already mentioned, this is our first time doing this presentation, so we would really love any feedback you have to offer. I've also dropped the link to the second part of our virtual engagement webinar series. Please feel free to register for that as well. The registrations are separate from this one. And finally, I also dropped a link to the blogs that Emily spoke about earlier. If you want more in-depth information about any of the methods or formats that Emily was able to discuss today, please feel free to check out that link, and there you will find all of our blogs as well. So thank you all for attending, and as Emily mentioned, we'll stick around for a bit, but until then, we'll see you next week.
Yeah, I do also want to add as well, I totally forgot to mention this, Fatima and I also have a couple of resources coming out after these webinars as well that will help support a lot of these conversations that we've been having as you go forward. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope to see you in next week for part 2.